Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson here on Tuesday morning. We are going to walk through the end of Nebraska baseball season. They went 1-2 in the regional, could not get by Florida. It turns out Oklahoma State couldn't either in the end, as the Gators are your representative, one of the last teams in the field, but they will be playing in a super regional. We'll be discussing some more baseball. We're also going to jump into some recruiting. And we're going to talk about it, not just like who's visiting and that sort of thing, but sort of what Nebraska endeavors to do with their recruiting operation and what Brian Christopherson learned when they invited media to come sit down with some of their recruiting staff as to what Nebraska is trying to put together over there. And we will have a few other things as well. So that is our plan for today. But as I mentioned, Brian, let's just dive right into Nebraska baseball. I don't know about you, but when the draw got announced, it felt problematic. And then on Friday, watching that game, and Brett Sears did not have, the best start, but just watching Florida come up to bat kind of felt like two different levels of baseball at times. With what Florida has physically and who they look like or what they look like and kind of what Nebraska is. And I don't want to make too much of that, but what were your thoughts here from the weekend? Nebraska beats Niagara on Saturday, loses Friday, Sunday to Florida. Go ahead. Just give me everything you got. Unload it. All of it.
Well, I think where you're going with that is it did seem like Florida, whoever came up, was like felt like he was like 6'3" to 6'5" to me, and sort of
they're
like
all tall, long, lanky, can cover the whole plate.
Yeah.
Flick of a wrist, it's still going 100 miles an hour.
It's like if there was like an after school movie and you had to play like a sort of the rival bully team, and they're just like all these really big kids that like hit their cleats, with the bat really like menacing, as they like say something mean to you as you're the catcher. They definitely had a little of that. As far as their size and all that. I didn't expect that, I guess. I don't know. They did look different, like than Nebraska, I thought. That said, I was with you. I don't think this is hindsight. I had a bad feeling in my gut when the draw was announced too. And I think it was because I would have much rather seen this Nebraska team get sort of like that 3 seed that's sort of like from a smaller conference and has had a really good year, but maybe they're not up for this yet. Like this might not be their stage. And Nebraska's riding high and beats them, 8-5, and then you move on. Florida, I was not fooled by their record. I kept going back to the fact, like, man, they were in the national championship last year. They still got the dude who's like the best player in college baseball, who like you can't pitch to at all. And that makes it really difficult in games like that. And so I thought Sears fought in the first game hard, to
give him a chance.
Yeah, he did. That's a game where you just wish you would have had a little bit more in the bats that day, and then had the tournament play out from there. And then I think you knew after that it was going to come down to, if Nebraska was going to make like a memorable weekend, it was going to have to include like Jackson Brockett and like Will Walsh just like having those sort of like storybook days, or like a 6-inning game, like where it's just like, man, he fought through that, gave the pen a chance. Brockett's had some really great moments, and unfortunately for him, Sunday wasn't his best game and only lasted 4 outs. And then, this is a team that has struggled to sort of, they felt like they were building that depth at the end of the year in their pitching staff, but the midweek struggles and other things tell us it had been kind of a tough thing. And they were then asked to get basically 23 outs. You knew at some point probably the dam was going to break.
Yeah, that game on Sunday kind of encapsulated where Nebraska as a program, this was a good season. Like they did everything that you would really want of them. They didn't win the Big Ten outright, which is a little bit disappointing. And they maybe lost a little luster going from March, where it felt like they had really positioned themselves as one of the top teams in the country, to they were just they're a pretty good team. That's what we saw. They just didn't have enough depth in some regards. But what hurt this weekend, and particularly on Sunday, they just beat themselves in so many ways. I mean, you had the very first at bat in the bottom of the inning, guy hits it to second. You got to be able to make the throw to first to get him out, particularly when you know who the next guy up in the lineup is. Like, it's just it was frustrating because it felt so self-inflicted in some ways. In addition to, that's a really talented team across from you. You can't keep giving them extra outs. You can't put guys on base ahead of, Jack Caglione. Like, you just can't do it. And it felt like for Nebraska, like the best version of Nebraska. And it's going to be a team that isn't going to beat themselves because they're just not going to have as much MLB talent as Florida does. But that doesn't mean you can't be successful or you can't compete with them. You just can't give away things the way that they did. I mean, you had a guy on second base multiple times over the weekend, Stan, where the next two hitters couldn't get him to third. You're not even giving yourself an opportunity for a ground out RBI or whatever, or a sac fly, because you can't even get them to third base. It just becomes an issue that you've got to be able to play fundamental baseball. And there was too much of a mental lapse that occurred that wasn't happening during the Big Ten tournament. I mean, they played sharp baseball outside of that one pickoff throw to second base for the most part of that Big Ten tournament. After that first game, they didn't do it as well in Stillwater. And it just feels like part of their brand under Will Bolt is they're going to be a grinding team. They have to win in the margins, and there's no bigger margins than just playing fundamentally sound baseball. You got to be able to get runners over. You have to be able to make the plays in the field. You cannot be giving up extra bases. It felt like they gave away outs on the base pass too with their attempts to steal at times. That probably falls on Bolt in particular. I mean, what was it? Dylan Carey got absolutely hosed down, and it wasn't even close by the catcher from Florida in that first game. Like, you just can't do that. And I know that there's a line where you want to be aggressive, but you also just can't give things away. And it felt like too much this last weekend. They gave stuff away.
Yeah. The error in the Sunday game is a key point by you, because I do think, it's easy to look at Brockett's line and say, oh, he didn't have it. And maybe it's as simple as that. That could have been the case, but you know how it can go sometimes in baseball. Like if you get that first out and you don't have sort of the damage control you had to do in the first inning, where it's already a stressful start for you, right. Maybe that doesn't pile into the second, where it just becomes a real tough deal. So that kind of really got things off to the wrong start. And then Caglione's homer in the second inning was like, that was one of the more impressive home runs I've seen. It was 119 off the bat as he heads out. That was something. He's a special player. There's no question about it. But you're right about, like, it probably wouldn't have mattered because he couldn't shut him down the next inning anyway. But after the delay, they got it to 7-6.
Yeah,
and
you're sitting right there.
I thought if they could get that run in to tie it at least. Does that change anything? Maybe not at all. You never know, just like how that affects like the biorhythms or whatever within a game of the other side. If you could put that, like, we got you, we caught back up, let's see what happens. You kind of have a jolt in your step. Instead, you kind of give the momentum back to Florida. They're like, okay, we're still in front, let's go mash. And they did. But I do think ultimately it was as simple as Nebraska was going to need like a 5 or 6 inning start. And not only to have a chance in that game, but for the rest of the weekend. Like, once Brockett, I guess you could have went back to him and other guys like later because he threw 48 pitches, if you got into that sort of circumstance. But once that happened, it just felt like, man, this is going to be really a tall order against this type of lineup for a Penn and pitching staff that's sort of been trying to figure out who those pieces are throughout the year.
Yeah, you definitely. It starts with getting some of those shutdown innings, and they never could. I mean, you're up 2-0, and they're able to tie it. I think they tied it. What is it? 2-0, 4-2, and then you get it to 6-7, and they just Florida. Every time Nebraska scored, Florida responded until the very end.
Yeah, and in fairness, Freilich was really good.
He came in. He kind of had one trick, and it was elevate the fastball, and they kept chasing it.
So if you want to argue against me a little, that I thought they had to like see if Brockett could extend it out and take their chances, and sort of they ended up paying for it. Because I think in a tournament setting, like I know there's people on our board who are like, take him out after the first inning, he doesn't have it and stuff like that. But sort of like you almost need to like test him, like see if he can battle through this, if you're going to have a chance in the big picture. But Freilich came in and did shut the door for a while. And then probably a bad break was the delay in a way.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how long he could have gone, but I think he would have gone a little bit longer because Bolt even talked about that was his one regret, that he couldn't send him back out there again. So that, would it have mattered? I don't know. But he was giving the team a chance in the middle innings. And then unfortunately, Nebraska couldn't cash in then. But really the damage goes back to Friday when they actually did play pretty good in the field. Sears gave him a chance and you could only get 2 runs against the Gators in that one. That was the game where you had to set the tone early in this tournament, and it was just going to be too tough to like fight through the losers bracket this weekend.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like Nebraska didn't get some performances themselves. I mean, Gabe Swanson's just been otherworldly. He was fantastic. They had some guys step up and have some critical hits in key spots, but it just wasn't enough of it. There's a little bit too much swing and miss, which is part of your game. I mean, that's going to happen. But when your swing and miss is also accompanied by you have a little bit of thump, like when they had Bryce Matthews and Max Anderson last year, you can survive some things some more. So it's just tough. I mean, Nebraska it felt like they were a good team. It did not feel like they were a great team by the end of the year. And it felt like this was a just result. They're probably a program right now that getting into a regional is kind of where they're at. And then to be able to get into the super regional or, to dream of the CWS, they're going to have to take some steps, both in terms of player development. And also, just like I said, they have to tighten stuff up. I know that has to drive Will Bolt crazy. Like some of the errors, some of the mistakes are just stuff that's uncharacteristic. I mean, you're talking about wild pitches. They had a pitch that was probably 3 feet short of the plate, and then it kicks off of your catcher and sails. It's just dumb self-inflicted wounds. And I think that's the stuff that you can expect for them to change. I don't know that they're ever going to come in with a roster quite like Florida had, where you have bona fide Major League Baseball players up and down, or that you have a guy who had a total of 6 hits for the year, just comes into the tournament and becomes Babe Ruth, like Ashton Wilson.
Yep.
Or Murphy. I can't remember.
Wilson, yeah.
I mean, he was 4 of 5 and 3 doubles and a home run after having 6 hits all year. Like that's some bad luck there. But ultimately, I believe that they're going to bounce back and they're going to have another potential regional team next year. I just don't know, Brian, what the actual expectation for Nebraska baseball should be. I think they're meeting where they should be, which is to be a consistent postseason team. I think they can be that. Can they get further than that? I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah. I would label the season a success too. They had to get back to this point. I thought that when they beat Penn State for the championship last weekend, the Penn State coach was really interesting in the post game, and he was talking about his program, and he said very rarely in sports do you skip steps, is what he was talking about. Like you have to have these like their moment sort of that step that they couldn't skip was they couldn't get over the hump in that title game against Nebraska. They weren't quite ready to, but he was trying to make the point to his guys that next year that can be different. Like, okay, you've been here, you've seen that. Maybe with this group and if you have a pretty good nucleus returning, there's going to be some big decisions. Gabe Swanson's probably going to get a lot of attention now. So we'll see what happens there. But this team hadn't been to a regional since 21. They had to get back there. And I think that experience in Omaha was big for the narrative of the season, one, but also it gave a little reminder to the fans and those in the program. It can get a little nuts around here if you get it going. And people are always, we've talked about this. We talked about it on the pod last week, like how they'll, Nebraska baseball can set things on fire when it's going. And Will Bolt has seen that as a player. That Friday through Sunday in Omaha, it wasn't like CWS type levels by any means, but there was definitely like, okay, I'm going to try to get out there, and they had 13,000 on that Sunday morning game at 10 a.m. And you saw, I think, if you're a Husker player, what electricity there can be for this program. And you would think that's sort of some rocket fuel heading into next year. And it did flip it. You got a dogpile situation. You felt what that was like to win a championship and call yourself that in one category. I think all that can be meaningful as you go forward, as you try to get to the next step then, which I think would have to be you find a roster that can fight its way to host a regional where you're that one seed who gets a team in the first round that you feel good about in your ballpark, you beat them. And, you're playing in front of your own fans. That's got to be the next goal.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'm not sure when, how, or if that happens in 2025, but they're certainly going to be coming in with expectations. Fans are going to be excited for it again, and we will see what Nebraska baseball is able to put together. And of course, at Husker 24/7, we have some of the best baseball coverage you can find for Nebraska, as Michael Brunt's win in the United States as good as there is for covering Nebraska baseball. So it's unfortunate timing this year. He was not able to be here for the end of the season, but I'm sure he'll have thoughts on what lies ahead, and we will get those from him the next time we have him on this show. We're going to take a quick time out. When we come back, we're going to get into some recruiting. BC spent some time with some of Nebraska's recruiting staff and personnel, and we're going to dive into some bigger picture questions as to what Nebraska is identifying, what they're looking at, how they go about recruiting. And this is a big month, Brian. June, we are officially in June. Big month for recruiting. Nebraska has a lot of visitors coming in. They have camp season going on. You just talked to a German who received an offer to play football.
Yeah, Constantine.
There we go. So there's a lot going on. So we're going to dive into all that when we return. All right. I mentioned we were going to get into recruiting, and so let's just jump right into it. Brian, tell us. So they invited the media to meet with some of the recruiting folk. What was the nature of those conversations? Give me a couple things that you took away from it that maybe you didn't know before, or they expanded upon that you had an idea of, but you came away with finer workings of what they're doing over in the recruiting department.
Yeah. First off, props to Matt Rhule for doing it. It was a event where he's, highlighting personnel that's very important to this program that sometimes people see their names. But it's good to sort of get in public. Okay, this is their job description. This is exactly what they do. This is how they play off each other. So I thought it was very useful in that way. I'm trying to think if there's something that just blew my mind that I didn't know. I don't know if there was that necessarily, but it was just sort of confirmation of how this has shifted as I think about as I've covered the beat, Schaefer. It used to be I would write so many stories highlighting the game day recruiting experience, and you had to get them here on game day, and that was Nebraska's biggest advantage. And the calendar is sped up such, and we obviously saw it last year, that June feels like crunch time in a way. This is June is the new January was under Pelini a little bit, where it was, except not as not as chaotic as that one was. I think it's
That's
more
so damning. That is so damning.
No. I don't mean I think they're more organized than they probably were. But Pelini's staff would get stuff done in January, and it was sort of this rush where you knew that it parallels in the way that you knew they were going to have to get 8 to 10 guys.
Yeah, but that's not where you want to be in that situation. What I'm saying is damning is
oh, well,
that sort of is a strong example of some of the shortcomings of the
well, that was that era. But
sure.
my point.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's the Matt Rhule thing. Sorry.
Yeah, my point to connect it to is that it's a sort of month where you're going to get I expect 8 to 10 guys, maybe, something like that. And you feel like you have to have it because we've talked to guys, Schaefer, who visited for the spring game, and they haven't necessarily decided yet, but they are going to decide by early July or June. And so just hearing Vince Ginta talk about how that's changed even since he's been here, and the advantage, the game, he said the game day experience is incredible. But you get them here to in June, like on June 21st or the 14th for these visits, and you can be so much more in depth. It's not like the kid has a game Friday night, where he has to get here early Saturday morning. He watches a game that takes up time, and then you only get so much time with the staff and to really see the community. Now you're getting that full, like a really good experience Friday, all of Saturday, where you really connect. And I think the thing that they feel like that comes across in those visits is this is a family. You're going to feel like it's a family environment. That's what most recruits end up coming away saying. And you'll take your chances with that. Like, put them in that scenario, and recruits are generally going to say, like, yeah, the players here actually, they like these coaches. They believe in sort of where it's going. And I don't think that's false gold or anything from us to say that. I actually think that's the feeling over there. And so that's what they've really got working for them, is they've got guys who are current Huskers who, when these players pick their brains, are giving them really good feedback, that says what you hear is actually matches up.
Yeah, the timing of visits is fascinating, because I know when I first started, the conventional wisdom and what the coaches would tell you is that they wanted those guys to experience the fan base. The fan base was the biggest driver of excitement, and what they could find on a Saturday in Lincoln was unlike of what they were likely to find back home. And that is all still largely true. But the way the calendar has changed, and also just the importance of the relationship and the time that the coach gets to spend with the recruit, has just been magnified, Brian. I mean, like, part of the challenge of those game day official visits is, like you said, you have your own game usually the Friday before, and then that Saturday, like, yeah, the coach might be able to spend 5 minutes with you on the sidelines talking here or there, and can talk to you after the game. But a lot of it is they're prepping for the game. They're trying to get, their last minute things done, and trying to work with the players in their position room, and their focus is there. When it is in June, your focus can be entirely on this linebacker that you have on campus, or this running back that you have on campus, or whatever. And you get to experience more of that person. And I think a lot of the driver of successful recruiting is being around these staffs that being around people you want to be around. Like, I think so much of the sales pitch with Nebraska from this staff is like, we know you want to play football. We know you're going to play college football somewhere. We think you should play with us, and here's why. This is why it's an enjoyable experience. And so many of these guys walk away, and it started a lot last year with offensive linemen, and by the end of the year, it felt like everybody. But they just talk about the camaraderie of the guys on the team. They talk about, like, hanging out with the offensive linemen on the Friday night, and they all decide to go to Chipotle, and, like, everybody at Chipotle already knows them because they go there once a week as an offensive line. Like, they're all there. And so the connectivity, I think, makes recruits feel like they have an opportunity to be part of something that's more than just like a football team. It's kind of like a whole ecosystem, I guess, if you will. Like, they're just part of this dynamic. And so I think that's a big part of all of it, is you just have more time to do that in June. And then, of course, if you're Nebraska, you want to get as many of these guys to commit early. One, because then you don't have to do as much recruiting. But two, you can do the second end of evaluation. And this is what the staff did last year. They want a lot of these guys committed, and they maybe took some guys people weren't prepared for them to take. But then they could look at the senior film and see, where did he grow? How did he get better? Did he use anything that he learned at camp? Did he use anything that he learned over the summer? Did he get worse? Do we need to move him off of our board? I mean, I think they moved on from some guys last year because the senior film wasn't where it needed to be. And so if you get those commitments early, you're setting yourselves in a better position for that going forward. And so I definitely look for them to be as good as anybody in terms of turning this month into a success. They did it last year, and I look for it again. I think there's going to be some camp offers coming up, and I would imagine with the visit weekends that they have ahead, they're going to have an opportunity for some guys where it's just simply to get in and check some boxes, and then ultimately say yes to Nebraska. And I think they have it structured that way. What else stood out to you in terms of those conversations?
I think when Ryan Callahan, who's Nebraska's director of recruiting systems and strategies, is his official title, he was in there and he spoke about how, in his opinion, Nebraska is the best recruiting database in the country. and they view it as, the quote he used was, a one-stop shop for them, where they feel like they have the verified numbers on every, like, okay, is this guy, it says he's 6'4" here, but is he actually 6'1"? Like, obviously, as 40 times can go all over the place, like what's real, what's not. And so they have a system where they believe they've really locked in on the numbers and the measurables, and they can say this is accurate before offering them. And it was kind of interesting, some of the behind the scenes stuff. Like, Callahan put this system so it could be on his phone, built it because he says Rhule texts him multiple times a day, like, what about this kid, like, what is this add up or whatever. And so, I don't know, stuff like that, I think, kind of encourages Husker fans when they hear, like, the head coach is sort of like on things like that. Like, maybe 5 times a day he's messaging, like, what's the high long jump on this kid, or whatever they want to look up. What's the actual size? What do we have on him? And yeah, they really trust their they believe of, as if you get guys with certain traits, certain measurables and explosives on the track or various things, that they can help develop him as a football player, but they want to make sure those are right. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. So just hearing him talk about it and the confidence they have in it, I thought was rather interesting.
I don't want to make too much of this, because sometimes, especially when it's the current sitting coach and you talk about these things, it tends to be just like overly
Glowing.
positive.
Yeah.
But we at least have the experience of covering multiple different football coaches here at Nebraska. What stands out to you about Matt Rhule when it comes to recruiting and his own involvement in it?
What stands out to me are some of the personal stories I've heard from, like, Braylon Prude when he's at a camp and Rhule gets called over, and Rhule's got his own. I'm not saying his stopwatch is the stopwatch they're using for their times, but I know he gets out the watch too, and, like, has the person run right in front of him. And I have a sense, if you've been in the game that long, you also just know when the dude's time, like, sort of stacks up. Like, you can tell it, like, when you're in person. And so just how he's like the main man, like at some of these camps, like, Quinn Clark, for instance, was sort of taking off last June. And suddenly Matt Rhule's over there, and they're working him at even, like, linebacker and all these different spots. And they're just testing, like, how does this guy move if put in different situations? How does he respond to maybe something he's not used to? And then I think what stands out is he's spoken a lot about it, and Texas Tech has the same format because they have some of the same coaches. Just the trust they have in the numbers that they use and how that's going to translate. I don't want to say it's like a money ball type of thing, but there is sort of like this data of, like, the numbers can tell you a lot. It's not always going to be 100% that just because this guy ran this or triple jumped this, that he's going to be a great football player. But you sure got a lot better chance, their history has shown them, if you have those type of guys who have that proven. And so I just think there's a lot of faith in their system. And I think you've seen they are not afraid to offer somebody that hasn't been really looked at in the same way by other power programs. Konstantin Pashos from Germany is an example of someone who has 21 offers, but right now the best ones prior to Nebraska were like Houston, North Texas, Boston College was in there. But Nebraska was by far the biggest and really changed the whole direction of his recruitment. They believed in what they saw up close. That was really the first time they met him. They put him through everything. They gave him the offer. They just trusted it on the scene, and we've seen that at these other camps. And they don't need a lot of, they don't have to go back and question themselves on it. They trust what they're about, and there's no really backing off that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is unique to me about Matt Rhule, and we noticed it last year, and it was you and I were over there on a Saturday. They're running offensive tackles versus they have a breakout group. And what I mean by that is they've taken the select guys at the camp that they feel are probably at the upper echelon of being able to play Power 5 football, and they come across different levels, and they're taking them off to the side of the field, And usually they're doing one-on-one reps so they can kind of see and watch these guys compete against comparable talent. And for instance, some of those guys that were standing on the far end of the field that we were watching at the time, Jake Peters, Landon Davidson, I think was one of them. Jack Limbaugh was one of the defensive linemen pass rushing that day. There's a couple other in-state names as well that were over there. I don't know if Jack Lang, who ultimately became one of the top recruits in 2026, or excuse me, in 2024, was over there as well. But that day, because I know he had camp, but I don't know if it was for sure that day. But it's the direct involvement of Matt Rhule and all of these sort of things. Like he's directly watching that. He's around it. I mean, when we would see breakout groups in the past, the head coach wasn't necessarily watching all of these things. And that's not always the biggest thing because they have it on film, right? Like he's going to be able to go back and watch it. They have cameras and everything on all of this. But the fact that Matt Rhule is just right there watching it. We watched Stone Saunders throw last year to, I can't remember who the wide receivers were. I think Isaiah McMorris was one of them. But we're watching Stone Saunders throw, and who's right there next to him? It's Matt Rhule watching with Marcus Satter. He's so much more involved than I recall seeing Scott Frost and Mike Riley and certainly Bo Pelini in the camp settings, in the recruiting settings. His own involvement, whether it's with different recruits on the phone, seems significant. And I think that's just who he is, right? Like he's someone who has his fingerprints on every aspect of everything that Nebraska is going to do. But I also think that when you're a recruit and you're Ike Ackerman and you don't even have an offer from Nebraska, but you have Matt Rhule hitting you up because he wants to talk about this dunk that you threw down and he saw the video online, and he wants you to come to Nebraska and participate in a dunk contest because he wants to see it in person.
Mm-hmm.
Like that stands out a lot more than when the designated guy whose job it is to talk to the in-state players reaches out to you and asks for you to come to a visit. Like his direct involvement in recruiting, I think, is a big benefit for Nebraska. I think it's pretty rare for a guy to commit to the Huskers and have not had a conversation or multiple conversations with Matt Rhule by that point.
And if you establish yourself from year one as a camp setting where you truly are working the camp, and it's not just a deal where you have, like, no offense to the grad assistants who work hard, but like, you have the guys who aren't the actual ones making the calls on like making offers. Like sometimes in the past, we would see those type of guys running parts of the camp, and you still need those guys. But there's no question under Rhule, everybody over there knows June is like a workaholic month. Like it's going to be a busy month for you. And we're not just like you're not just going to the camp to blow the whistle, look the other way, talk to another coach while some drill's going on, move to another station, and then go, eat Qdoba, and then do it again for 2 hours where you're actually not. I was trying to even it out because I think you said Chipotle. So
I did. Yeah. I appreciate that.
So I was
really
like
do.
An equal opportunity there. But guys like Ackerman have realized, because they saw it last year, they're actually going to pull the trigger on guys if you ball out in front of them. Like Donovan Jones from Omaha North. I remember he said he was going, I can't remember the school he was trying to impress. It was somebody else. Wyoming. Yeah. He was trying to get a Wyoming offer. By the end of the day or the next day, he's like, Nebraska's like, and then a week later, he's a Husker commit. Like he's a really good example. I don't know. Did Tanner Church go to a camp?
No, he didn't. I think he absolutely would have come to Nebraska to camp if he hadn't already gotten the offer, but they liked him so much before that they just went ahead and offered. He even talked about he might just show up and work out just because he wants to work in front of the coaches.
He's a good example, though. He's got like great testing numbers and stuff like that. All the numbers look right in the database, and Nebraska believes in him. And nobody, I'm not saying nobody, but nobody that's a power conference school did.
Well, Colorado State's wide receiver coach didn't know who he was. So
yeah. And it meant a lot to him. Like he said this in an interview with us, like Rhule and Satterfield were like, you can play for us. Like that conversation, like how it built him up as a prospect after, I mean, I understand it. Like, there's guys like him all over this country who think they can play. Some of them can't, some of them can, but they're frustrated because they're not out there. You're not getting those offers. You're seeing someone else you think you're better than that's doing it. This happens every cycle. But Nebraska has shown on some of those guys, if you really put it in front of us at a camp or like on your film and you have the numbers, we'll believe in that, and we can believe in you and all that. There's other traits, of course. You got to have the right character and all that other stuff they check out. But I do think the camp setting here is different than most places in the country. I really do. I think that's a big thing for Rhule to have it be that way, to have it seen by Nebraska kids as that way, where you grow up and you're like, there will be an opportunity to be seen. And it's not going to work out for everybody. There's only so many spots, but there is a chance to be seen, and actually proof is in the pudding that they will offer some of those kids. And they did a lot of it last June. And if you can make your camp the one where people across the country catch wind, like, you'll have opportunity there. That's a pretty big deal. And I think that's always been on Rhule's mind, to have it be that sort of camp that's sort of talked about, where Nebraska is a place people flock like for stuff like that, and recruits do to see if they can make it. And so, you got to build it from that first year. And I think they did a good job with some of those offers and kind of getting that out there, that that's the way it is.
Yeah. And I think you'll start to see some more. There probably wouldn't be power conference type staffs, but you'll see more football staffs try to come and work these camps, because the quality of player will go up. Because the idea is, if I can go and get offers, if it's worth coming here. And it's not just, you don't have to be a 2025 trying to catch an offer here before the summer ends. If you're a talented 26 or 27, this is the time to be going to Nebraska's camp. This is how you get on the radar. I mean, as well as I do, Brian, we think more of the Quinn Clarks and the Bartas and Prudes, because they got that magical offer in the summer, and it was a breakthrough one. How many guys did Nebraska offer in 2026 and 2027 just off of what they did last summer? Some of them local, some of them national, some of them, at satellite camps, some of them at the Nebraska camp. Some of those guys, I mentioned Jack Lang, Nebraska was his first offer. That's a guy that's a top 100 recruit in the 2025 class now. Mm-hmm. Nebraska was his first offer. Alex Mansky, I think he probably had Iowa State before that. Suddenly Alex Mansky's, Iowa's interested, Minnesota's interested, Penn State's interested, Michigan's interested. Like, there's something to be said if you're a recruit in the Midwest and you can make yourself get to Lincoln, like you can, if you're good enough, Nebraska will put you on the radar if they offer you. Mm-hmm. Teams are following what they're doing now. And so it's a unique opportunity. If you're in the Midwest and you're within driving distance, it's become a worthwhile camp. I would have told you 4 years ago, Friday Night Lights was a joke and not worth anybody's money. You weren't going to get much out of it. The heyday of it had already ended. Satellite camps had basically rendered it moot, and the offers had gone out way too soon, and they weren't getting enough young guys coming in to really matter. Now it feels like how they ran camps last year. You can have you have the opportunity to really kind of go and prove yourself. And if you're an in-state kid and you don't do it, you're only hurting yourself in the end.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a good point, but it kind of connects to like their willingness to offer people first, like a Mansky and some of those guys. For some reason, it also strikes me kind of connected with that, in them trusting their own evaluation process, that sometimes there'll be like a 4-star kid who has like 25 to 30 offers, and Nebraska will then suddenly, it'll appear like, oh, they offered this guy, and you'll look and he's a lot of people have offered him. And there's that part where they'll say, well, what took you so long? But I also kind of like it, because it's like, Nebraska's like, we're going to do our due diligence. And right. Like, is this guy, and if it's like a 26 guy, there's time now to like, maybe get him in here if you can work on it in the spring or something, who knows? But it connects to me to that point of believing in your process, not just like, oh, this guy's rated this, offer him, like, or whatever. Like, some of them, maybe they are no-brainer offers and all that, but it to me kind of links to that idea of also like those guys who get their first offer from Nebraska. And it's like, no, we did our due diligence. We believe in it. This is when we offer, and we're not going to be dictated by what others do or when they did it, basically.
Yeah. Anything else we want to toss in recruiting wise before we jump over to finish off with a conversation brought to us by the message board?
No, the only thing I'd say is it was a good, cool deal that the recruiting folks talked to us. Also, Sean Patton, heavily involved over there, and Dr. Susan Elza. Keith Williams, former Husker, has just become a big, important part of that process too, over there. And the way he connects to recruits and how hard he works, I think is really something to take away too.
All right. I am trying to get my computer, which is just crawling at a snail's pace right now, to probably because we're attempting to record this, to get to the message board so I can make sure I give the right credit to the person that tossed this out there. And this is a conversation that we usually have throughout the year. And the idea is, which game do you think is the most important for Nebraska to win? And you and I ended on we ended on different games here. I can't find the thread because, of course, I can't find the thread. So I apologize. I should be giving credit to someone, but there it is. Posse Husker on June 2nd at 4:10 just posted a thread and said most important game in 2024. And it's been interesting because I think there's the emotional importance of the Colorado game. Mm-hmm. But then I do think that there's other games that might be bigger factors into what your season is, certainly later in the year. But I think even that month in September, Brian, I'm not ready to say the Colorado game is the most important game in September. I'm going elsewhere. But I know you feel like for anything to matter, it's got to start at home in week 2.
Yeah, well, I mean, not for anything to matter. It's not like they couldn't come back from a loss that week and have a good season.
For the self-healing to start.
I think about it more from the fan base's perspective. They've been through it, like, in these early season losses. Like, as a fan, I could use a Major League Baseball as a great example of this. Like, all I asked for from my Minnesota Twins, you asked for more from your Cleveland team. But I asked for them to get me through the summer into football season where, like, we're in the hunt. Like, I'm feeling good about watching this, like, on a July day, like, because it is interesting in the standings and all that. Make the rest of the season relevant to me is a big part. And then sometimes things go your way, sometimes they don't at the end, but at least it was an enjoyable, like, ride there. And Nebraska football has not allowed that ride to take place even at all. Like, a little bit last year for the first time in a while because they had the October, which sort of righted things. And then you thought, okay, November could be really interesting. And of course it ended up 0-4. But you think about
it was interesting. You can't say it wasn't interesting.
It was. But you think about, like, the week 0 losses through the years, like before college football seasons even started, really. Like, the other teams are still, like, going through their walkthroughs before their first game. And Nebraska's got an 0-1, and that's in league play against, like, a team like Illinois. And they've built themselves up a little bit, but still, that hurts the soul here. And then it's just like a thundercloud over the season before it even began. And Colorado has damaged Nebraska in that way with some of these early losses. And I just think it's going to be an opportunity to play a team who, though they are not, in my opinion, probably going to be like some amazing juggernaut Colorado, it's going to be a game that, as far as it's covered and broadcasted, is going to feel like a big time, like, type of game, like a national game, like one of the highest rated TV games in September. And for Nebraska to win a game in that type of setting would be huge. Not forget about the payback aspect, Deion Sanders, forget all that for a second. Just for Nebraska football, like, okay, they're 2-0. Now they got 2 more night games coming up. They want a nationally televised game that had people buzzing, or will have, people talking on the stupid ESPN shows at Monday morning. That would be big, I think, for this program to have that start.
Yeah, I don't discount any of that, and I think it would be a giant emotional win. I'm sort of looking at it like, regardless of the result of the Colorado game, which again should be a win, and if you're going where you want to go, it needs to be a win. The Illinois game kind of kicks off the Big Ten play for you. You haven't started 1-0 in Big Ten play in a little while. You have an opportunity at home on a Friday. Certainly not when anybody, envisions Nebraska playing. But you have a chance to sort of start your year, start your conference slate against an opponent that, frankly, Brian, I don't know if they're going to be any good, and I don't know if they're going to be bad. I don't know what to do with Illinois. They're sort of a wild card team to me. They have a coach in Brett Bielema that I think is going to have them competitive for the most part. They're a team that, unlike Nebraska a couple years ago, excelled at a style of football where they didn't beat themselves. They made other teams play their style. They played physical. They beat people up. And I think they're going to give Nebraska a game. I don't think they look at Nebraska or coming to Memorial Stadium on a Friday night game. Like, that is not an atmosphere that Illinois is concerned about. Because, frankly, Nebraska hasn't been an atmosphere that teams have had to be concerned about. Because, frankly, Nebraska hasn't had a team that teams are concerned about. They have talent, but the team has fallen apart over and over and over. They need to go and win that game. I mean, because if you're thinking they take care of Colorado and that gets you to 4-0 before another critical game in the month of September, the first road trip where you're going out to West Lafayette, I just look at that Illinois game as like, that's where you got to step in the right direction in conference play. That's when you need to prove that you can handle some of these Big Ten West teams that stick around and always find ways to win because you always find ways to lose. Like, this is sort of where I think Nebraska has to prove, like, we're not the same team that continues to shoot ourselves in the foot. And we're not the same team that can't get going or can't get started against a Big Ten West opponent for now the fourth year in a row. You couldn't do it against Illinois in 21. You couldn't do it against Northwestern in 22. You couldn't do it against Minnesota in 23. Obviously, the first game in all of those. And we can make whatever excuses we want. And Nebraska coulda, woulda, shoulda, but they didn't. And they have that opportunity in that Friday home game to get started in the right direction in conference play, to prove that you can handle the teams that you think that you're better than, and to keep moving forward. And I think that Illinois game is really critical in that regard. And if we want to have the conversations about Nebraska shouldn't be playing on Friday night, win football games. Go beat the team that you're playing on Friday night.
I think they'll still be forced to play on it, but
probably. If you're a hell of a lot better, it's a tougher conversation to have.
Yeah. It probably is. I'm not as worked up about that as other people. So
I'm not either. I'm just saying, for the people that, that are really upset about it, or the idea that Nebraska is everyone's homecoming game because it's been wins in recent years. I mean, you're not going to be the homecoming game if it's, if that's the criteria for it. But I think that opportunity against Illinois is a good chance to get started. And you have to beat the comparable programs. Like, I don't care about the Ohio State game in 2024. That's not a comparable program for Nebraska. That's a measuring stick. And it's only a measuring stick if you've proven worthy of needing to measure against Ohio State. And to be able to measure against Ohio State, you have to take care of the Illinois and the Purdue's and the Rutgers and the Indianas that come before it. And that starts with Illinois.
Yeah, I think Illinois is a good answer too, by the way, because if you talked about one thing Nebraska was very effective, which was a step for them last year, was October, and when they had the run where they beat Illinois, beat Purdue, beat Northwestern. And those have been the games I've sort of circled for a while, where it's like, it's sort of going back to what that Penn State baseball coach said. You can't skip steps a lot of times. And one of the steps Nebraska has to take, first and foremost, is to be the top of the middle category, like that middle category of teams in the league. Maybe you aren't in the top 4 of an 18-team league, but if you're like 7 or 8, that's a jump forward for this program. And they showed signs of it last year. Honestly, it was an underrated win, and people were kind of grumbling about it when they beat Illinois, because remember the offense was such an eyesore in the second half.
They had a chance to put them away and they just didn't.
But the defense was so phenomenal, it kind of got lost in it. But when you actually take a step back, and yes, it was kind of an ugly game, that was like that was a big time win for that team at that time, because it was right after the Michigan game. It was when they had that Sunday night practice. They went over there on a Friday night. They won, they got the goal line stand early, and that's the type of game you got to build off of going forward. So look at the schedule this year. After Illinois, they play at Purdue, they host Rutgers, at Indiana.
Yep.
You got to go at least 3-1 there. I know that everybody would say 4-0, but let's say
at least 3-1.
Let's talk about what they've been. So I'd say at least 3-1. And if you do that and you start the non-con, right, it would be awesome. And maybe this is talking ahead of ourselves, but everybody's been focused. It's emotional. I'm gonna get emotional about this 6 wins.
We gotta get a sponsorship of hydration on this show. Someone to just get you some water during the middle of the
like they fill it up. That'd be a good ad. If they could take the 6-win topic off the table, like by late October, early November, and people
by the bye week, if you go 6-0.
Well, I'm saying, like, if you could get to 6-1, and it's just like that's done, And I know there's some people are like, okay, you guys, they haven't even. I get that, but the schedule sets up in a way where if you're a team worth your salt, you're at least 5-2, I think. Yeah, and so if you're 5-2 or 6-1, and we're not having this whole discussion on November 14th, are they going to end the drought? And we're just beyond that. And then it's like, okay, what's next? Okay, knock off Wisconsin now and take that drought off the table. Like that would be, that's your dream Husker season there. The bowl game narrative is erased, 2 months in. And then you take your big shots at some of those sort of your USCs and whoever. And you're right, Ohio State's a measuring stick game. You can go there, play loose, see how you stack up and whatever, But I think Illinois is a good pick by you. I'm not backing off mine, but in the sense of it's the start of that 4-game run.
Yeah. No, that's kind of why it sets up for me. And I fully understand the emotional
get choked up
need for Colorado too. Like there's something to that, especially, and it's hard to even imagine. And then you think back of these games, and it's like the way they lost in 2018, the way they lost in 2019, how they played basically after the first quarter out in Colorado last year. They need a healing moment. They need the cathartic. What ultimately didn't end up being that big of a win in 2016 by the end of the year. But when Nebraska knocked off Oregon and everybody was able to like puff the chest out a little bit, and it felt like Nebraska was moving in the right direction. I think the Colorado and Illinois games would give you that if Nebraska were to win both of those. I think people would be a little bit more excited and kind of feeling themselves a little bit as Nebraska were to turn to the rest of that 4-game slate as you put it out there.
I've seen it too in my life where you win a game like Colorado, especially with those 2 night games that follow, and it becomes sort of this just like, okay, try to come in here and win at me. Like you kind of have that like chest out a little bit by the time Illinois comes in. Because like the fans are, like you say, you're feeling it. The players have won a game in a big spot. And so you've got that sort of, you're walking tall in a way that I think can be beneficial, but it's a good discussion and it's fun to have in June. I know coach would say every game's important and all that, but it's fun to have these talks because you could go a lot of different ways with it.
That's why we don't coach, Brian. We just get to babble. Yeah. And we get to have conversations, and it was a good conversation, and we appreciate. I don't know. I would pronounce it as Posse Husker. We appreciate the good topic there on the message board. You can participate yourself on the message board. Head over to Husker247.com, and if you don't have a membership, certainly we invite you to join. But you can also just join for free and dive in on some of the free conversations as well. And then you might decide, hey, I might want to be a member. So be sure to check that out at Husker247.com. Brian, anything else we want to get to today as I told you we'd have probably a 30-minute podcast, and we're sitting here at 54 minutes strong and counting.
Well, some people have bigger yards to mow, so you have to talk for a little bit longer while they're out there.
Do you listen to podcasts when you mow your lawn, or do you listen to anything?
No, I don't listen to.
You're one of those psychopaths that doesn't
Yeah.
have anything in his ears when he's out mowing his lawn. You're
This
just
is-
enjoying the nature.
This isn't a knock on anybody. I definitely don't listen to any other Husker talk. And I don't listen to, honestly, I don't listen to like Vikings Twins talk. I just don't. I feel like I devote too much time with what we do and to it, and you hear most of it anyway. So it's like I step away. So honestly, I don't know what other people are saying about things, which is fine. But no, I don't. I listen to like a baseball game sometimes while I mow.
Okay. But you do have something on. You're not just mowing with no headphones, or
once in a while I'll mow without. That's a really like peaceful experience too. If you just get your thoughts in order. Yeah. Just get your think about some things, like think about what you've done with your life so far and how
I do that. Mowing. I like mowing because it's the ultimate autopilot experience, because you know what you need to do. You've mowed the lawn before. So when I have music in, it's very easy for me to like, it's background noise, but I'm thinking about something else. I'm like coming up with, if I feel like it, coming up with story ideas or thinking about other things, deciding what I want to make on the Blackstone, enjoying the fact that there's no one screaming in my ear or whatever it is. But yeah, I can't imagine not having something to listen to though, because it's just the noise of the mower, I think, would just irritate me if that's all I'm hearing after a while.
Well, I'm probably not all there and not the person people should model off of. So
Not true.
I think it's probably a respectable thing to have this very podcast playing in your ear, even if there's some rambling at points, even if the guy sometimes has at least one episode, 10 seconds per episode, where he like chokes through it and can't get a word out like I always do.
Even if you don't watch Seinfeld and you may not understand dated references from 30 years ago.
I was actually thinking about that today. People like me will reference a show that is 30 years old now. And I was thinking like my parents, and I don't remember like my parents and grandparents like referencing specific like Gunsmoke episodes, from like 20 to 30 years previous. Like enough time has passed that it's almost like not healthy like to do that. And so I'm going to try to cut back a little bit. I actually had this very thought that would be a type of thought I would have while mowing probably, but I had it while making coffee this morning. Like I got to cut back on some of those like 90s references. It's over. Just, I can't bring it back.
So the difference is it might be over, but because of streaming and because of the immense popularity of Seinfeld, it lives on for new audiences.
Yeah.
There's people who didn't watch. I didn't watch Seinfeld during the 90s. I watched it off of the DVDs when it came out. And I watched it most recently through streaming with Netflix. So I feel like you should still make the references, mostly because I will still probably want to make the references as well. And I don't want to be on an island on this. We know Bruntz is making the references regardless. He cares not whether it's current, hip, or, whatever.
Right.
So I think you're okay there. I don't think you should let that one go. Maybe you can drop Wings. You guys don't need to reference Wings anymore.
That's a little too obscure. I did throw my CD collection away like a couple of years ago, and that was like a kind of tough. Like I had all these burned CDs and everything, and
Oh my God.
I threw the whole case away. I had to do it all together. Like it just had to go at the same time. Otherwise it wasn't going to happen. Cause I've done it before. I'm not going to use these 3 anymore. But anyway, I don't have any of my 90s CDs because I don't think there's any place to play them.
And you have the big bulky album book that sat up on your front seat when you were cruising around Omaha and Lincoln.
Yeah, you had that, which was dangerous. You also had to have like the little one that went in your what is it called? A sun shield. What would you call it? A visor. Couldn't think of it. Where you have like 10 it's like your top 10 at that moment, like, and you kind of pull it out.
You rank them? Did you order them?
No, but you'd have your leading 10. I do think it's a lost thing that younger people don't have now, where you used to go to like Best Buy and get a CD and you would get it into your car, and you were so anxious to get it open. You have that plastic wrapping, which is really tough. You'd have to like use your teeth to like get the corner and get it started.
Yeah.
And that was like a 2-minute thing to just get it open. But then you'd listen to like the 1 or 2 songs you wanted to hear like a few times while you're driving home. And then you were kind of done with the CD for a while because you'd heard the 1 or 2 songs you wanted. And that was that. At least that's how I was.
You're not a big, like, you got to let the album play like 8 times before you're fully immersed in it.
No, I was very much like, okay, I know which ones I like. Here they are. And occasionally another one would grow on me, but I didn't give enough opportunity perhaps for the whole album to talk. That's probably where people who had records would say they had the advantage. I think the record was thought of as more of like, here's the full book. You must take it all in together to appreciate what this song does with that song and all that stuff. And maybe our CD generation lost some of that.
And now we're just into the singles generation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people shut this podcast off 5 minutes ago. But anyway,
I don't know. I enjoyed the last 5 minutes. Maybe the end of the podcast banter is what we need to do. The loyalists are going to stick around and fight their way through it on the off chance there's one more mention about Nebraska, which there won't be. Other than you can check out anything that you need to know, anything that's going on, you can find at Husker247.com. For Brian Christopherson, I'm Mike Schaefer. We're Husker247. We'll be back next week with some more Husker247 podcast.